Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host and the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement and the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I'll give a viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. All right. So, this is somebody that inspires me. My guest for today is Bri Woodson. And Bri, you are known online as AKA the controversial blonde. And I'm so excited to sit down and talk with you because there's more than just content creation, because there's a human being behind this content creation. And you're running for Congress in Georgia District 12. Now, I would love for you to just kind of dive in and we'll just dive right in and walk me through a little bit about your story, what got you into content creation. And you're not the first one to go from content creation into politics, because if in a way it kind of connects itself, or there wouldn't be content to create, right?
Absolutely.
So it kind of dives into that, but let's give a backstory on like who you are, a little bit about your what led you into doing this, and just introduce yourself to everybody right now.
Yeah. Hi. So, Bri Woodson. Um, so the content creator story is always a fun one. It was purely by accident. It was the end of January of last year. I couldn't sleep, and as we do, we doom scroll, right? And I'm doom scrolling, and I came across a video, and it was a girl talking about how she felt stupid because she didn't do any research and she only listened to the people around her and she just voted for Trump because they told her to, and now she's scared. And at the end of her video, she goes, "You can roast me if you want to." And so I posted a response video. I said, "Have you seen that video of that girl talking about this?" And yada yada yada. So I guess I essentially roasted her. And I posted that video at like 3 a.m., no hashtags. And I finally fell asleep. I woke up and it had over 1 million views. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And I've always been creative with my hair. And it just so happened my hair was on a blonde cycle. And MAGA was very offended that I was a black woman criticizing Donald Trump with blonde hair. And so they thought they were going to bully me out of my hair. So my username wasn't even the controversial blonde to begin with. So MAGA hate made this brand a thing. So that's how we got here.
Now, how do you separate the the content creator side versus running for Congress? Because I know that there it kind of, what's the best way to phrase this? I know it contradicts, but at the same time, it kind of opens access to that, because you see your comments, you see it's like, okay, obviously people are eating this up. Like maybe I do have something to say. Maybe, what was like that thought process for you in deciding to run for Congress? And then we'll dive in a little bit more to like your platform and like your story. But what's that switch? What was that switch look like for you? Because I'm also thinking of Kat Abogazale in Illinois, which is one of my favorite human beings.
Yeah,
Let me
I know
just say
that.
that. Now, whenever I think about that, I think about that content creation. I consider myself to be a content creator, but more on like the journalistic side of it and
Yeah.
sharing the stories that don't reach the headlines. And because what do we see on the headlines right now? We see war, we see ICE, we see Donald Trump, we see this, we see that. There's a lot more going on than just that, because there's also progressive candidates like yourself that's running in Georgia historically, that has a lot of potential, like a really long history in, Black liberation, in civil rights, in justice. So there's a lot to talk about there, and we'll dive into that. But what's that switch look like for you? What was, I guess I'm asking, what was that aha moment, if you had one? Or is it just, I want to run for office, I want to make a change, I don't want to just say, and as you state on your website, quote, I'm not running to talk about change, I'm running to deliver it. What does delivering it look like to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ooh,
So I
that's a
think
good question.
this is like super layered. So As far as the switching between creating and, running, especially as presence on social media goes, um, luckily, I'm pretty consistent, across the board. There's not a lot of shift that I have to do between the things that I talk about on my main page and the things I talk about for Congress. What I guess I'll say is, with the congressional race, I obviously have to be a little bit more micro focused, instead of the macro, the bigger national news, if that makes sense. Um, but as far as the aha moment, so I don't know if you are quite familiar with what happened last year in the area of the district, not exactly in the district, but right around it. The Hyundai plant incident, where a woman called ICE on the Hyundai plant. She's running. She's running in the same district. And during the time, the Democratic side of the race was very quiet, and it didn't look like there was anybody that was actually going to jump full-fledged in the race yet that I saw. So I posted a video, and I said, what if I jump in? Would you guys like that? Would that be a thing? And I got a lot of yeses, like 80,000 of them. And I was like, okay. And, I've said it for years, 30 seconds of insane courage will change your life. And, so that I think that moment was definitely a catalyst. But beyond that, it's a series of unfortunate events. They pile on you, they pile on you. And just like, the quote that you mentioned, it didn't seem enough anymore to just sit behind my computer and my phone making my videos. I needed to get boots on the ground. And since then, I have hit the ground running. I've been in DC in press conferences. I've signed on with citizens impeachment. I've been helping organize marches and rallies in DC. I needed something tangible, so I went and got it.
Yeah, I'm really excited, to first of all, it's an honor to sit down and talk to you, first of all. Um, Secondly, your platform is more than just a platform, it's personal. And I would love for you to kind of dive in and talk about a little bit about your story. Now, again, I'll give a viewer discretion as advised due to the nature of the discussion after this. And let's kind of dive in and talk a little bit about your survivor story. You and I, as we discovered before we started recording, we have a lot in common, and it comes down to tackling addiction. And not in like the not the war on drugs, etc. It goes beyond that, right? Now, whenever we think about addiction, um, I've been sober for 10 years. And I don't talk about it very publicly very often. And there's a lot of reasons for that because I do not have that mental capacity to explain it every single 5 seconds. And people will ask, well, why'd you do this? Or why'd you do that? If I responded to every single person, I would be literally on my phone for 24 hours straight because there's so many people that are, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with asking those questions. It's just redundant and it gets very taxing. And so I don't share a lot about it. A lot of people know my sexual assault story. They know about domestic violence, they know about gun violence and everything that I've encountered. They know a lot about my mom and etc. But let's kind of dive into your story a little bit. And, you can be as open as you'd like to be here. You can be kind of, this is a safe space. Our listeners are more than just listeners, they are engaged in the conversation because they want to know the people that we're uplifting and recommending as candidates. They want to know, which obviously you're on our recommended candidates. While we don't directly endorse, we do the candidate recommendations, and you're on my list. I'm letting you know that now. So we'll be putting up a post, kind of letting people know, like, hey, we had this conversation, but anyway, I can ramble. But I would love for you to just kind of dive in and share a little bit about your
Yeah,
personal story.
absolutely. So, I guess it kind of started with the very common statistic of, kids going off to college freshman year. partying, drinking too much. And, for a few years, I had a fairly normal time. Nothing really out of the ordinary, but, you know, life went on, traumatic things happened, drugs happened, and that was really the issue. But, you know, COVID hit and then I spiraled, and at the tail end of it, I got involved with really, really bad people, ended up being trafficked by someone involved with the cartel. And um I don't even know what kind of luck I have. Like I don't know who is looking out for me, but one day he just literally got up and walked out of the apartment, just packed his things and left. And my first instinct, that abandonment kick, my first instinct was to run after him, and something told me, sit down, just sit. I sat, I waited, and I had actually, I think maybe 2 days later, um, a suicide attempt, then went to treatment. I was gone for like 35-ish days. Did the whole sober living, IOP thing. And actually, when I was about 45, 47 days into sobriety, something like that, that is when my best friend was killed. Someone gave him Press-Fentanyl, when they told him it was Xanax. And so that was, goodness attest, um, categorically probably the hardest thing I've ever done was, take the call and have my, all of my party friends, on the phone crying and screaming and needing me. And, obviously I want to go to them. These are people that I've been around and with for years at this point, right? And also the juxtaposition of being in a healthy environment in my clean apartment with my housemates and my house mom right there. And I looked around at them, and I looked at them in front of me, and I picked up the phone and I said, I love you guys, but I can't. And I stayed. I didn't go to his funeral. It was just too soon in my journey. And, it's, like I said, categorically probably the hardest thing I've ever done. But also at the same time, I think that is what kept me on the right trajectory. Um, Shortly after that, I came back home. The grieving thing, I needed to be around family. I didn't want to be around strangers anymore. So I came back home, ended up working for a temp agency. Um, for property management. And then I got hired on and worked my way up to assistant property manager and pretty much restarted life. Finished my bachelor's of science in human resources, went back to school for my master's in clinical mental health counseling. I just finished my residency hours last month, actually. I am studying for my licensing, my associate licensing exam, and I have a focus in substance use. Um, I still enjoy my wine every now and again, but I am in such a healthy place. I, and really, they always say that substance use it's not the problem, right? It's something else is the problem. It's never been the solution. It's just something else is underlying. And for me, it was my mental health. Um, I started going to therapy. I journal. I do healthy things for myself. Take your meds, kids. Um, I keep myself in a healthy routine, healthy communication, open styles of communication. I exist from a much healthier base now. So, it's not indulging to cover up or to hide something. It's just for the sake of existing, and that's enough, if that makes sense.
It does, and it makes entire sense. And I want to say thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable with me right now because I know it's not, God, how do I phrase this? The best way to phrase this is even though I'm an open book, there are still times that I'm in the middle of talking about something. Like whenever you were talking, I started getting a little teary-eyed. Good thing we're off camera, you know, a very good thing. But I think I'm at a loss of words, and this doesn't happen very often because it's not very often that you encounter somebody who just kind of like gets it on a different level, And again, I want to say thank you for that. Now, whenever we're looking at your platform, and full disclosure, every time I interview a candidate, I look at the FEC reports. I look at this website that is very handy called opensecrets.org that I utilize very religiously about organizations, about elected officials, about candidates. Everything is on there. And I didn't see any PAC money. I didn't see any APAC money. I didn't see anything, obviously that kind of like does this red flag for me. So let's kind of talk about, money and politics, right? Obviously, we see a lot of influence, not only just on the national level, but also in the states. Every elected official has something, right? Then you have those ones that don't take any PAC money. They're actually in it for the people. They are everyday, working class. They have this background, they have this story, they understand. They see it, whenever we think about healthcare and education and housing and, gun safety, common sense gun laws, right?
Yep.
And then justice reform, second chances, and those promises to their communities. But let's kind of talk about money and politics a little bit. What do you see as the influence in a lot of the political decisions that our elected officials continue to create? And what separates you from your opponents? I already know this answer. I already know this direct answer, but
Oh, well, first of all, we'll start off since this is the most recent thing. The echoes of Jim Crow voting era South, the barriers. I talked to, friends upstate like Harry Jaron who's running. It's like $100, a couple $100 to get on the ballot. Down south, that is not the same story. I just wrote a check for $5,220 to get my name on the ballot. That's how much it costs in Georgia. My other option was to get signatures, but because the district is so large, it's 22 counties, I would have to collect an obscene amount of signatures that just would not have been realistic. So essentially, you are pretty much forced into paying this obscene amount of money. And actually, so that number comes from 5% of the congressional salary, which is $174,000 a year right now. And it gets even worse if you go down in Florida, it's actually 10%. So to pay to get on the ballot in Florida, if you don't get enough signatures, you are required to pay $10,440 to put your name on the ballot. And, so I see often online, some people, because they don't understand how deep this web goes, they're often up in arms. Why do candidates have to ask for money? Why are candidates always fundraising? This stuff is so expensive. It's like, oh my gosh. It's a doozy. It is such a doozy, just traveling to get to things and,
Mhm.
you know, um, buying business cards and flyers and prints and ads and uh, like random things that you never thought you needed, for an event. Like I find myself in Office Depot so much. Like
You
buying
should just
people,
take up a stock in Office Depot.
like I have a corner in my apartment that has like a pop-up tent, a bin full of just the most random things. I'm just like, this is what it is, you know? And it adds up so incredibly quickly. And then, those are just the material topical items, right?
Mhm.
I am so incredibly blessed for the support that I've gotten, and that is where I really appreciate my platform, because it has given me a lot of outreach and access that the other candidates simply don't have. So, just simply from putting myself out there and videos going viral quite often, I've been able to establish an entire team. My campaign manager actually worked on Obama's campaign both times. She's a publicist. She's an author, Dr. Trinity Brinkley. She's amazing. She's a genius. I have a social media manager who is actually one of my old friends from high school. I have an event planner. I have a field director. I actually now have an intern. I have an image consultant. It has been such an amazing just culmination of support. Um, And, but that is not common. A lot
Mhm.
of people are having to pay their staff, and that costs money, right? And even deeper, you look into just the management programs of just keeping it all together, web hosting, sending out emails, sending out mass texts, buying a voter roll, buying the software to manage your voter roll, to break it down so you can canvass and door knock, printing materials to go canvass and door knock once you get to that point. It's never ending.
It is, and exactly.
But
Now,
I am proud of the very unique way, I have done something very, very, very unique, I think, for a grassroots candidate. Um, and I would say 95% of what I've fundraised thus far has um, strictly been from online support. And I think that really speaks to the power of social media and how that's completely changing how political races are ran. Like I said, I really appreciate my platform because it has allowed me I already had, an establishment, um, recognizable, in a sense. So I think we've raised what, maybe 24,000 dollars, completely grassroots, no PAC money is I'm very, very proud of that.
it is, and because we see what happens whenever PACs get involved in elections. We see what happens because they lose sight of their platform and they start focusing on what APAC wants them to talk about. God forbid we say what's happening is genocide. It is, and God forbid we state that, right? And how can we sit
God
here
forbid we
and
say children
state
dying is wrong. That's so radical.
exactly now? Exactly. And there's a lot of influence in that, but also it goes beyond just those packs too, because there's also BlackRock that owns a lot of our housing, if not majority of the housing.
It runs
And
so deep.
it goes so incredibly deep. And the influence in that, and then you have like platforms like Meta who
Hmm.
are involved in Congress, and you have Google that are paying Congress. Oh, we can't remove these deep fakes. We can't talk about this. We can't talk about that. We can't talk about this online regulation. We can't talk about this. Can't talk about that. It's so deeply alarming. And money in politics. My quick question to you: what about ending Citizens United?
All for it.
Absolutely.
Full
Now,
stop.
yes, because that literally got us into this entire disastrous mess.
Mhm.
I mean, let's be real, this has been going on for decades. But, even my mom states this isn't the America that I grew up in, right? And this is not the America that I grew up in. I'll be 30 years old this year. My mom just, or today is my mother's birthday. Today is March 16th. She turns 57 today.
Eight.
Oh, I'm sorry, 58. I
My
always
birthday's actually in 2 weeks.
I always
March,
get it
baby.
messed up. Yes. So are you still within like the Pisces or is it out of
Aries.
you're in Aries? Okay. I always get messed up on those. My partner is really good
Very,
about
it's very,
remembering.
very close.
um, but kind of pivoting here and talking about some like economic things. And first of all, again, thank you for sharing a little bit about your personal story. Now let's dive into your platform, and this is where I know you can really hit hard on. So, economy. What does an economy look like that actually works for the people and not a corporation? I know this is a loaded question. There's a lot that can be said here,
It
but
is. It is, but I think honestly, the simplest way it is when people are offered a living wage without breaking their backs for it, is when we actually will see improvement, right? Um, right now this is such a layered, it's layers and layers upon capitalism and consumerism and we have been so careless as a society and as a country of just the endless consume, like we just consume, and the my friends laugh at me all the time, and I don't talk about this very often, but we were doomed when the microwave became a thing because we entered into this whole era of convenience and everything fast. And that's also when fast fashion started becoming a thing. We lost our patience and everything just became quick fast food, microwave dinners, just everything quick, 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 consume, 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 more, more, more. And all we did was just stack corporations while making
Mhm.
ourselves effectively smaller and removing the value of human. And now it's just the dollar. And our economy definitely reflects that.
Because there's a trillion something dollar deficit too, right? And they stated that whenever they were cutting these crucial grants, that they were attempting to lower the deficit. How well did that work? It didn't. And
I
because
don't want to hear about anybody's credit score. What's America's credit score?
literally, exactly. And we're stuck in this trickle down economic capitalistic hellscape that literally fucks people over like my mom, excuse my language, but it literally does. And thinking about that, it also ties into housing because the rent is too damn high. And and then you have mayors like Jacob Fry in Minneapolis that has a unique opportunity but refused to extend the eviction moratorium for families that were impacted by the ice raids because they have not left their houses to go to work. Therefore, their rent they're literally scared to and had the opportunity to extend this eviction moratorium, however, refused to do so and vetoed what the city council wanted to do. And it was, recommendations for Governor Walz, which he has also been complicit in silence right now as well. But it goes on just beyond Minnesota, right? So whenever we think about housing and like the housing cost, and like I said, I'm based here in Kansas. I grew up in Missouri. Housing is astronomically, ridiculously crazy. They say that they put rental caps, they do this, they do that. I don't know for who, because whenever I think about a single parent that is working two, three, four jobs, has a child, has, trying to get their education, because God forbid, we make education affordable too. But whenever we think about housing, what does housing we need to have more like public housing options, right? Not this like industrialized and this private money, BlackRock, like all of this. But what does housing look like? And whenever we think about housing, I look at your platform. Housing, homelessness, and second chances. A safe home is the foundation of stability, dignity, and opportunity. Protect renters, curb predatory housing practices, expand affordable housing, and ensure people re entering society and first time homebuyers have a real path to a stable home.
Yeah.
This hits home for me for a lot of different reasons, including the current situation that I'm in. Housing is kind of a juggle right now. A lot of things have contributed to that. A lot of things have, continued building on top of an issue that was already there. But what does housing look like to you? And what about those second chances? I know what it means, but can you explain about second chances and like re-entering society and the first time home buyers having that path to stability? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when maybe subconsciously when I was, writing out platform things, I was going from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, housing, shelter is a basic, right? It is one of the bare basics of a healthy, successful human being. And we have so many barriers to long-term housing, safe housing, housing that families can grow into. And one of the largest barriers, if not the largest one, is how elitist just the basic apartment has become, right? You see, in the state of Georgia, some places require 3.5 times the rent and income just to get the apartment. And then you got to come up with a deposit. And then you also got to pay all the application fees. And you also got to pay your background fee, You've also got to pay some kind of other conveniency that they've come up with. Plus, when you do get the apartment, if you get the apartment, not only are you liable for the rent, but the electricity, and any other fancy doodahs they come up with, right? And effectively, people are literally having to choose between food and paying the rent and going to the doctor, paying the rent and buying clothes they need or something their kids may need. And so for me, second chances and actual accessibility to housing looks like cutting out some of those ridiculous fees just to apply for a place to live. It looks like setting an actual cap on rent. Like I look at my apartment, I love my apartment, it's great. But I also look around and I'm like, this place is almost 2 grand a month. What for what again exactly? And you have that ridiculous, insane requirement of 3 times the rent, 3.5 times the rent. For so many people, that is quite literally an impossibility. The income, the rate these jobs are paying is not mathing to equate to 3 times the rent, barely 2 times the rent.
And even
It's such
sometimes
a
the one
ridiculous barrier.
times, even reaching that high barrier. And whenever whenever we think about being unhoused and homelessness, they continue to criminalize people that are living on the street. They continue to throw them in jail,
It's
and
the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
because then we also run into the issue of mass incarceration for unnecessary bullshit that can be solved whenever we meet the basic needs. I love that you talked about the hierarchy of Maslow's need, or Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because that's the psychology in me. Whenever I was going to college, I was a psychology major. I dropped
Nice.
out to kind of focus on, just sustaining a little bit, right?
Life be life.
But literally, and not only that, but that education is too damn high. I mean, like, who in the hell can afford that? Legit question.
Yeah.
Sure as hell ain't me. But whatever. Speaking of which, like education, equity, and access. Education should be open doors, not bury families in debt. Fully fund public schools. I love this because we know that those housing vouchers are complete, or damn it, not housing vouchers. The education vouchers and the school choice vouchers are absolute scams.
Yeah.
I'm completely against it 100%. Modernizing classrooms, expand career pathways, and teach an honest, empowering history that prepares every student for citizenship and success. Quote, as an educator and advocate, I believe every child, regardless of zip code, deserves a quality education and a pathway to success. And anybody out there who's listening, you can go to Bri Woodson for Congress.com and read everything that I'm reading right now. I'm going through each thing and just asking those questions because I want to hear it. I can read it, but I want to hear it in your words about what these things mean to you. So, whenever we think about education, equity, and access, education is literally the key to life. It's literally the key, to the success of these future generations. But whenever we think about that school curriculum, now I know what I was taught, and it's similar to what my mom was taught, and like future or like past generations were taught. But what does a quality education and thinking about equity and access look like to you?
So it is not lost on me that I am very privileged when it comes to education. Growing up, I went to private schools, I was homeschooled. I have a bachelor's, I have a master's, so I know that I am very privileged in education. And education, unfortunately, especially in this country where the average person is honestly very undereducated, um, it is it has become elitist. And I feel like it is a responsibility of the educated to share that and to not hold to don't gatekeep that. And an uneducated population is a controlled population. And when I'm talking about equity and equality and education, I fully 100% mean high standards for every school, rural counties across the American South and even beyond that, they struggle for basic. Are textbooks updated? Do they have access to the latest technology? I was just talking to a friend recently. I forget where it was, but she was telling me how the school couldn't afford a librarian, so the library in the school closed. That blows my mind.
Mm.
Just and just thinking about how much kids miss out on just by not having access to a library. How much opportunity that instantly cuts off.
And it's a safe
Kids,
space.
right? Kids across town have damn near access to the Library of Alexandria, right? So it's a disparity that is grossly unfair, and we are way too established of a country to have such gaps in our education system.
Yep,
But I also
exactly.
could talk
And
about for hours how I think that that is 100% also on purpose, because again, a miseducated population is a controlled population. And pardon my language here, excuse my French. I always tell people Miss American propaganda is the hardest working bitch I know. She never stops working. She's going 25/8.
yep,
She's working overtime constantly.
yep. And doesn't get compensated for it.
Nope.
Exactly. Sound familiar?
Living the American dream.
Exactly. I was going to say, it can't get any more American than that. Um, Absolutely, 100%. I agree with you entirely. I am loving this conversation. And whenever I want to dive into healthcare and like mental health access and equity, but first I want to highlight the story of Adriana Smith. I may or may not bawl during this because it always hits me really hard. We've collaborated with Ayanna Pressley quite a bit. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is one of my favorite congresswomen, literally ever. Kind of like Pramila
She's so
Jayapal, and
beautiful. I love her.
she's a deep inspiration to me. But in the state of Georgia, there is a fetal personhood law which restricts abortion access in the state of Georgia. And whenever I think of Georgia, I cannot help but have Adriana Smith's face like pop up in my mind, in my memory. I can close my eyes and I can see it. This story hits me to the absolute T because this is a part of systematic failures that literally failed this woman. Adriana Smith should still be alive. She
100%.
absolutely should still be alive. Um, she had a series of medical emergencies. She was having seizures and she was declared brain dead. But and she was pregnant. And I know you know this story, but this is to anybody out there who hasn't heard the story. They did a CT scan and she had blood clots in her head. They declared her brain dead and put her on life support without consulting her or consulting family, consulting anybody. And they kept her alive while they kept her alive. She's in this state. They kept her alive so she could carry her child. This bill was known as House Bill 481, which was known as the Life Act, which passed in 2019. It went into effect shortly after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade with its Dobbs ruling on June 24th of 2022. The law bans abortions after the point at which an ultrasound can detect cardiac activity in an embryo. Typically, this is about 6 weeks into the pregnancy. My source for this is NPR.org. They did a really good write up on Adriana Smith. The law ban, I already stated about that part. It also gave Smith's fetus the same rights as a person. The law says, quote, unborn children are a class of living, distinct persons, and explains that the state of Georgia recognizes, quote, the benefits of providing full legal recognition to an unborn child. This story hits me incredibly hard because she was declared brain dead in February and was taken off life support in, I believe, June or July of that year. And she gave birth to her child, or I guess I shouldn't actually say that she gave birth. I mean, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this because it's literally forced. And my I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and I always stumble whenever I talk about this because it just hits me so incredibly difficult. I you being in Georgia, I'm going to ask it this way: you being in Georgia, whenever you hear the stories of Adriana Smith, and there's been a lot of other Black women because the Black maternal health and the
Mm.
mortality rate amongst Black women is incredibly hard or incredibly high, and it's like three times, of a white woman, etc. But whenever you hear the stories of Adriana Smith, it kind of brings those bells, it sends up a lot of red flags. And it brings a lot of that generational trauma. It brings a lot of that back, right? And it talks about that. It talks about those things. And this is not to protect children.
Oh no.
This is about power and control over somebody else's body. This
100.
is about controlling women, or anybody else who has a fetus, or anybody else who has a uterus. This goes into that. It's about power and control. It's about telling people, oh, no, that goes against my religious belief, because oftentimes this is rooted in religion, which is why I always say we have separation of church and state for a reason. It ties into this
This
too.
is why.
And because Adriana deserves better. But I know that there's hundreds more that are like Adriana. There's hundreds more exactly like this. So when you being in Georgia, let's think about like reproductive rights and abortion access, and let's kind of dive into that a little bit. So whenever you hear about fetal personhood and these restrictions placed on people like Adriana, and whenever you hear Adriana's story, what pops into your head? What do you immediately think of?
Myself.
Mhm.
Um, I am a Black woman who has PCOS. I just
Mm,
recently got married on January 1st, but we got engaged in 2024. And, we sat down and had a serious conversation because I saw the way things were going. And I said, he's going to be president. And so, ideally would have loved to explore the option of removing, the IUD and doing the whole process. But instead, I kept my IUD, just something told me.
mm,
And, shortly after Arjana Smith's story happens, right? Her case
mm,
happens. And that just kind of like put me into a spiral. Like that could have easily been me,
mm,
right? Um, you know, uh, Black woman already, at risk for, maternal mortality rate, PCOS, already, fertility issues. That could have very easily been me, right? So whenever I hear that story, it genuinely hits home.
mm.
Like that could have been me. This is my state, right? Like, and it, it, like you said, the generational trauma. I think of the father of gynecology, and I put air quotes around that.
Mhm,
How we
mhm,
got gynecological services and sciences is from the torture of Black bodies and Black women who didn't even have anesthesia. And so it's just the experimentation and commodification of Black women's bodies has been so written into the story of America, and it's so age old.
And forced sterilization is something that obviously has not been addressed literally at all.
Mm-mm.
And that mm, I can't even begin to explain how I feel about it as a white
We could
person.
go, we could go, oh, we
Um,
could go down this rabbit hole for hours, man.
because there's a lot to talk about.
There is so
There's
much,
a
and
lot to it.
that's a lot about what my content creation is, my
Mhm,
platform. I
mhm.
talk about the dark Black history that people are uncomfortable about, don't want to address. So, we talk about the cannibalism part. We talk about that because it's important.
And it's the education that we should be receiving in schools, not the whitewash, watered
Absolutely.
down bullshit that,
Absolutely.
that we continue to receive. And I think the older I get, the more I start learning the actual history, and the more it pisses me off.
Highly
Um,
Black AF history.
Yes,
Great read.
yes, yes, yes. Y'all hear that? There's a book. There's a book. You know, kind of like there's always a tweet. There's always a book.
There's always a book.
Um, so gun violence. You know, Georgia has a astronomical rate of gun violence,
Yeah, we
but
know.
not worse than a lot of other places. I will throw that out there because it happens literally everywhere. And oftentimes we hear gun violence, you know, from rural communities like, oh, it's not going to happen here, it's not going to happen here, it's not going to happen here. And then whenever it does, then it leaves those rippling effects because that's exactly what violence does on communities. I speak from my own personal standpoint. I'm a survivor of gun violence and domestic violence and sexual assault. Being pistol whipped is never a fun story to explain, and I will, you know, bear the details on that. But it was a very traumatic experience, and I still deal with the after effects to this day.
Yeah.
Um, but gun violence, two of my closest friends have been shot and killed. One was in 2019. Her name was London,
I'm so
and
sorry.
that story hits me really hard. And then I started getting involved with, you know, Every Town for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action, you know, founded by Shannon Watts, legend in the gun violence prevention world, but also the story of, you know, the stories coming from police violence and how it also ties into gun violence. You know, I think about Sonia Massey. I think about George Floyd. I think about Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor hits me a little harder
It's
for
just
a,
recent, like 2 days ago was the
yes,
anniversary. Yeah.
yes, 6 years. And Breonna Taylor was working towards becoming, you know, she was just getting started. You know, she was an EMT, she was working during the pandemic, you know, she was doing a lot of this work and serving her community.
Yeah.
But also I think about you know, the suicide, the gun suicide epidemic as well, because it does tie into that. And those numbers oftentimes get directly related to gun violence because
Yep.
and it needs to continue doing that. And I know it's kind of like a controversial opinion because, you know, a lot of people don't see a gun suicide being, but it is still an act of
No,
violence.
it's counted in the statistics as violence. It's a form of violence.
Yes. And it needs to continue
Self-inflicted
being.
violence is still violence.
Mhm. And I think those of us who do this work, we understand that. And those that do not, they do not get it. They will never
Yeah.
understand until it happens to them. And that can be said about literally anything. That can be said about, you know, domestic violence, sexual assault. Whenever I came forward with my story, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm like, I understand it's like the go-to thing to say, just like whenever somebody dies, you know, you oftentimes hear, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But we never hear the thing of, what can I do to help you
What do
sustain
you
or get past this? What do
what
you
do you
need? What do you need? You know, is there something I could do for you? Is there something I can get? We don't hear that. We always hear, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And people just move on and they forget about it. Right. And it's, you know, it's in their feeble memory and it just gets pushed to the side. And then we continue having these issues and systemic racism, systemic violence, and the system working exactly how it was designed leads into deaths.
Yeah.
So whenever we think about gun violence, you know, let's talk about red flag laws. Let's talk about, you know, mass incarceration. Let's kind of dive into a little bit about justice reform and what the second chances kind of look like to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that the gun conversation, especially when you're talking about the South, is
Ooh.
very complicated. And also as someone who respects the Constitution, it's really complicated. Because I do like to exist in reality. I like to improve reality, but I also like to exist in reality, and I know the reality that I live in, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know that there is a reality in at least in our timelines where we will see guns completely eradicated out of here, and it also is in our Constitution, right? And with that being said, we also cannot ignore the overwhelming statistics of mentally ill people in this country, and we can't stop pretending that those two don't connect.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking about common sense gun laws, So many people go from 0 to 1,000. You try to take my weapons and do this. And that. It's like, no, what we want you to do is look at reality, right? And the reality of it is a lot of people here are mentally ill. A lot of people here have backgrounds that are not conducive to owning a weapon, right? And those are things that need to be addressed and effectively established across the board. Um, and this blanketing of, but that's my 2A rights to skirt and ignore the violence that we are undergoing, that literally is not happening anywhere else. Like it doesn't happen like this anywhere else, is asinine and it's fruitless. And we got to stop, right?
It's one of those things because you can support the Second Amendment, but also be pro common sense. It literally is. My grandfather was a gun owner.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a union organizer. He was also a Air Force veteran, and he had guns, but they were always locked up. He always took, whenever I got older and I started, wandering around the house, he kind of tightened it up a little bit. And some of the other grandkids that he had, he tightened it up. He's like, okay, we got to make sure that they can't access these. They were downstairs. I knew where they were. They were downstairs, locked away. And he stored them in a very safe place that only, he knew where they were. So in the event of an intruder, or in the event of, defending his home, they were always there and ready to go, right? I You could be, and I'll be the first to say, I support the Constitution as well, and I do believe in the right to bear arms. I believe in the right to self-defense. I understand that. Going out and committing a mass murder is not self-defense.
No,
Shooting
it's not. And
innocent people is
also,
not self-defense.
when our forefathers were, writing that little amendment down, they weren't really clocking semi-automatic weapons, right? Like that wasn't on the menu at the time.
And whenever we think about a well-regulated militia does not involve a single person. It involves what the states already have, which is called the National Guard.
Correct.
Now, it doesn't, there's a lot of interpretation that can go into that, et cetera, but that's literally what the US Constitution does state. It states a well regulated militia that does
Mhm.
not give you the right to go out and shoot 15, 20 people at a school, where
No,
students are supposed to be getting educated and becoming our future leaders, not dodging bullets in their classrooms. Somebody can tell their child, I'll see you whenever you get home. That child may not be coming back. And it's a real statistic in America.
crazy work.
The leading cause of death amongst youth and children is gun violence. It's the very real statistic that we live in. And this, I can't even, it should have stopped with Columbine, but then it went to Columbine. It went to Parkland. It went, we had Sandy Hook. We had all these other schools. And then you have a
Like, what is
movie.
actually the tipping point? Like, what is the hard? Like, I can't imagine what the hell the hard line is. If we hadn't already hit it, what is it actually?
And that's why we always say that we need more than thoughts and prayers. Every time we hear about a mass shooting or a school shooting or etc., we hear about thoughts and prayers. What about that policy and action to prohibit and prevent the next one from happening? Gun
And
violence is a policy choice.
what I say to the thoughts and prayers thing? I'm not religious, but I will use the language if the conversation dictates, right? So, thoughts and prayers, doesn't it say somewhere in the Bible that we're supposed to meet him halfway? So, what are we
Mhm.
going to do?
Mhm.
Thoughts and
And
prayers is only half the equation.
last night on March 15th, because today's March 16th, so this episode comes out later on. Last night, the Oscars took place, and there was a documentary that won an Oscar, and it's called All the Empty Rooms. It went around to these families that have had their children literally taken away by gun violence in their classrooms. It included Jackie, um, who was murdered in the Uvalde school shooting. And this documentary hits hard for those of us who do this work, who understand the complexity that violence is not linear, it is complex because there's a lot that goes into it. You said it best. There is a mental health issue within this country. There absolutely is. Does that equate to every single one of these shootings? No, but there is a very big margin. Now, I think expanding the access to mental health resources and healthcare resources is absolutely one method. The other method is just teaching that gun safety, giving out free gun locks, teaching the gun safety, keeping it away from children, because there are a lot of incidental shootings. A 2-year-old child, they can grab a hold of a gun, they can accidentally shoot themselves. It does happen it does happen a lot. I mean, I would not leave an AK-47 out on a bed. Who the hell would? And I'm gonna stop at that
I
point
wouldn't,
because there's a
I
lot more
wouldn't
that I
leave
could
a
say to
pin on
that.
the bed with the
But
baby.
yeah, no, there was a case here in Kansas City that there was a father, and I think it was like a 3 or 4 year old. I think like 3 or 4. It was like it looked like a younger child, and he was cleaning his gun and accidentally shot the child. Like,
I think actually here recently, I don't know if it was in Georgia, but I know it was maybe in the last couple of weeks, a child either shot himself or shot another kid, parents with the parent's gun.
yeah, and that's where that common sense comes in, and it leads into a lot of other questions, but we'll leave it at that point. Now, whenever we think about, kind of like closing up this conversation, now at the beginning, I stated about the quote that is on your website, and quote, I'm not running to talk about change. I'm running to deliver it. Your platform is going to deliver it because this is what your constituents are looking for. This is the energy that we need to be bringing because this all of your platform is literally common sense. It shouldn't be you shouldn't even have this on your platform. It should be like millions of other things, right? We haven't even gotten to this point yet. You know what I mean? Like we haven't even gotten to this point yet.
So much unpacking still to do.
Yeah, and there's a lot, and a lot of it does come from that generational trauma, and worrying about stepping on other toes, which obviously is very real in existence with Money in Politics and Citizens United. You see this influence of PAC money in politics. You see all of this. It all stems together that we need to elect the people who are going to work for the people, not against them, especially marginalized communities. So the last question to you is what advice would you I
Oh
can
goodness.
I can hear you in my head with this answer. Don't do it. No. What is a piece of advice that you would give to somebody who is thinking about running for office? Sorry, I'm cracking myself up with this because
Oh,
one of my friends ran for Congress and she said, I'm never fucking doing that again because it was a lot.
it is so much. Um,
What's that advice?
Rest.
And I guess a second part to this question is what do you wish you would have been told about running for office? Run, don't fucking
Wow.
do it. But
That, but I think the main thing is rest. I think it's really easy to get sucked into the I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. But this also it is on a time limit, but it also takes longevity, and you cannot think, you cannot perform, you cannot produce, you cannot speak well if you are not rested. And also, rest is radical resistance in an environment that capitalizes off of our exhaustion. So, best advice is to take your rest, take care of yourself, prioritize self-care no matter what you do. At least 15 minutes a day, do something nice for yourself. That's the therapist in me. Um, and what was the other part of your question?
the other part of the question is what do you wish somebody would have
Oh,
told you about running for office?
hmm.
This can go in a million and a half directions, so I'm actually kind of curious to see.
What I wish someone had told me.
Some of the
Honestly,
common
it's a positive
things.
one.
I was gonna say, yeah, let's
It's
talk
a
about
positive
positive.
one. I was not prepared for how many amazing and genuine friendships and connections I was going to make. And
Outside of like your social media followers, these are like your
yeah,
legit like people that you would be representing, and these are
yeah,
people that
it's been so cool. Just like I said, this is a very different kind of wave of congressional races. It's a very national kind of race. I've been in DC quite a bit. I got to meet Al Green back in November. I got to do a press conference. We got to lead a march in DC. I got to meet a bunch of other congressional candidates from, around the United States, and we've built this beautiful coalition where we rely on each other and we check on each other every day, and we boost each other's content, and we've just created this community. So, this one is not it's not a bad one. I feel no matter what happens, this has been, yes, one of the hardest things I've ever done. Craziest, probably stupidest, but but also one of the most beautiful things I have ever done. I've made history. I've officially become the youngest Black woman in Georgia's history to put her name on a ballot. Um, I have met amazing, wonderful people that whatever comes of this, will always have a place and a role for each other in activism and politics. And this is just only the beginning. So I'm so very excited to see what's to come next.
You hear that, y'all? You can't get rid of her that easy.
Ain't going nowhere.
All right, my friend. It has been an absolute honor to sit down and talk to you. I'm so excited. I wish you all the best. I wish you all the luck. I know you have a primary coming up on May 19th.
Yes.
So, how can people follow you on social media and how can they learn more about you? I
Absolutely.
know I said that's the last question, but this is it.
You're fine. So for honestly, to find more about me, I guess the cool thing about this congressional candidate is that I have a digital footprint. You can find me under the controversial blonde on TikTok and Instagram. There you'll find a lot of my political commentary before I ran for Congress, a lot of history videos, deconstruction, things about white supremacy. We talk about that quite a lot over there. As far as congressional related things, you can find me at Bri Woodson for Congress on both TikTok and Instagram. And my website is briwoodsonforcongress.com. And on my website, you can both donate and also get involved. And keep in mind, to volunteer, you don't have to be physically in the district or in the state of Georgia. You can be anywhere. If you think you can pitch in, let me know. I want to hear from you.
I'm so excited. All right. Please take care of yourself, and I will see you out there. I know you're gonna do this damn thing. I feel it. I feel it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.